The stars had been quiet for 15,000 years. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the research station, watching the binary suns dance their eternal waltz across the void. Behind her, the sounds of children's laughter echoed through the corridors as her daughter played with the other kids. It was a sound that had become rare in the galaxy, precious beyond measure. The Galactic Confederation stretched across 800 worlds now, each species living in harmony under the great treaty that had ended the last war before Sarah's great-grandmother was even born. It was the longest peace in recorded galactic history, a miracle of diplomacy and cooperation that had allowed civilization to flourish. Sarah's people, the humans, were among the newer members of this great alliance. Only 3,000 years had passed since they first reached the stars and stumbled into the larger galactic community. Their entry had not been smooth. There had been a war, brief but terrible, until both sides realized that humans possessed two qualities that made them both dangerous and valuable. They could fight with devastating effectiveness, but they could also forgive completely when the fighting was over. Since then, humans had found their place as peacemakers and protectors. When conflicts arose between other species, human mediators were often called upon to find solutions. When pirates threatened trade routes, human ships were the first to respond. When natural disasters struck distant worlds, human relief efforts were already mobilizing before the distress calls finished transmitting. This research station was a perfect example of humanity's peaceful nature. Dr. James Wright and his team of xenobiologists had spent the last 5 years studying the unique stellar phenomena created by the binary system. The gravitational dance between the two stars created pockets of space where exotic matter formed naturally, matter that could revolutionize medicine and energy production across the galaxy. But this wasn't just a sterile laboratory. This was home to 97 people, including 23 families with 73 children ranging from toddlers to teenagers. The humans had learned long ago that the best discoveries came not from isolated researchers, but from communities where children could grow up asking questions that adults had forgotten how to ask. 8-year-old Tommy Martinez chased his friend Zara through the gardens, their laughter mixing with the gentle hum of the air recyclers. Teenagers Sarah Kim and Marcus Johnson worked together on a school project, mapping gravitational fluctuations with equipment that would have been cutting-edge military hardware in any other species' hands. The youngest children played in the nursery while their parents worked, watched over by volunteers and teaching computers that could answer any question in any of 47 languages. This was the face humanity showed to the galaxy: peaceful, curious, focused on building rather than destroying. What the galaxy didn't fully understand was that this peace was a choice, not an inability. Admiral Kethfer of the Zephyrian Empire understood this least of all. The Zephyrians were one of the oldest spacefaring species, their empire spanning dozens of star systems long before most other races had developed agriculture. They remembered when their word was law across vast reaches of space, when younger species bowed before Zephyrian wisdom and power. Those days had ended when the humans arrived with their strange ideas about equality and their disturbing ability to inspire other species to stand up for themselves. Kethfer stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Glory, staring at the research station through the viewscreen. To his eyes, it looked like a symbol of everything wrong with the modern galaxy. Humans, barely out of their own star system by galactic standards, had established this facility in space that the Zephyrians had claimed for mining rights 3 centuries ago. The legal situation was complex. The humans had received permission from the Confederation's Scientific Council, and their research was benefiting all member species. But the Zephyrians had filed their claim first, even if they had never actually used the system. In the old days, Zephyrian ownership would have been absolute. Now, there were negotiations, committees, compromise solutions that favored the younger species over their elders. "Sir," his aide reported, "long-range sensors show 3 human vessels approaching. Civilian configuration, no obvious weapons." Kethver's mandibles clicked in what his species used for a bitter smile. No obvious weapons. That was the problem with humans. They had learned to hide their true nature behind facades of peace and cooperation. But Kethver remembered the stories from the old war, how human ships that looked like peaceful explorers had suddenly revealed themselves as deadly warships. "Signal the station," he commanded. "Inform them that they are trespassing in Zephyrian space and must evacuate immediately." The response came quickly in the calm voice of Dr. Wright. "Admiral Kethver, we understand your concerns. We have all the proper documentation from the Confederation Council. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss this situation." Always talking, always trying to find peaceful solutions. Kethver had spent his entire career watching human diplomats twist situations to their advantage with their words and their strange ability to make other species trust them. "Not this time. There will be no discussion," Kethver replied. "You have 6 hours to abandon the station, or we will take action to enforce our legitimate claim." What happened next would be debated by historians for generations. Dr. Wright tried to contact the Confederation Council, but the subspace relays in the region were mysteriously experiencing technical difficulties. The 3 approaching human ships changed course, moving away from the station rather than toward it, as if abandoning the researchers to their fate. Kethver should have recognized this as wrong. Humans never abandon their own, especially not their children. But his prejudices and his anger clouded his judgment. When the 6 hours passed, he gave the order that would end 15,000 years of peace. "Take the station. Secure all personnel for transportation to Zephyrian space." The boarding action was swift and efficient. The research station had no weapons, no military personnel, no way to resist. Within 2 hours, every human on the station was in Zephyrian custody. The adults were separated from the children, loaded onto different transport ships, and sent to various detention facilities throughout the Zephyrian Empire. 73 human children, ranging from 3 years old to 17, found themselves prisoners on the Zephyrian homeworld, displayed on news broadcasts as protected persons, while their parents disappeared into the vast Zephyrian prison system. Kethver had meant to send a message about Zephyrian power and human weakness. Instead, he had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. The last age of peace was over. The news spread across the galaxy in hours. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in her office on Confederation Central, watching the emergency session of the Galactic Council unfold on her screens. Representatives from 800 species filled the great chamber, their voices creating a chaos of sound that the translation system struggled to process. "Order! Order!" The Altarian speaker's crystalline voice cut through the noise. "We will hear from the Zephyrian representative first." Admiral Kethver stood at the central podium, his tall reptilian form radiating confidence. "Honored delegates, the Zephyrian Empire has acted within its rights to secure its territory from illegal occupation. The human research facility was established without proper consultation with our prior claim. We have taken the humans into protective custody while this matter is resolved through proper legal channels." Elena watched the faces of the other delegates. Concern, yes. Discomfort, certainly. But not the horror she was feeling. They didn't understand. They saw this as a political dispute, a legal matter to be resolved through negotiation and compromise. "The human children are being well cared for," Kethver continued, activating a holographic display. "They are housed in comfortable educational facilities on our homeworld, receiving instruction in galactic history and Zephyrian culture. This is an opportunity for cultural exchange, not a hostile act. Elena's hands clenched into fists as she watched the footage. Human children sitting in sterile classrooms, their faces pale and confused, while Zephyrian teachers droned about the glory of their ancient empire. Tommy Martinez, whom she had met at the research station just last year, stared at the camera with 8-year-old eyes that had already seen too much. The Confederation's response was immediate but measured. Emergency protocols activated. Diplomatic channels opened. Human Ambassador David Kim requested immediate access to the children and the return of all personnel within 72 hours. But something else was happening. Something that wouldn't show up in diplomatic reports or news broadcasts for several more days. Captain Maria Santos received the message while her cargo freighter was docked at New Geneva Station. The text was simple. Family emergency. Please adjust your schedule accordingly. Maria had been carrying agricultural supplies to the outer colonies for 15 years. She was a peaceful woman who had never fired a weapon in anger, never even raised her voice in an argument. But she understood the message. Every human ship captain would receive the same one within the next few hours. She began making calls. Control. This is the Peaceful Sunrise, requesting immediate departure clearance. Acknowledge Sunrise. What's your destination? Maria looked at her navigation display, where her ship's computer had already calculated a new route. Sector 7 Alpha, cargo delivery. What she didn't mention was that Sector 7 Alpha was only 3 jumps from Zephyrian space. The same scene played out across human space. Cargo ships changed their manifests. Passenger liners altered their routes. Exploration vessels cut short their missions and began moving toward assembly points that had been programmed into their computers years ago, but never used. On New Eden, the most peaceful of human worlds, Mary Chun worked in her garden as she did every morning. The tomatoes were growing well this season, and her roses had never been more beautiful. But today she paused in her weeding to check her personal communicator. The message was there, as she had known it would be. Recall protocols active. Report to Facility 7 within 24 hours. Mary cleaned the dirt from her hands and walked to her storage shed. Behind the gardening tools and fertilizer bags, hidden by a panel that looked like part of the wall, was a sealed container she had hoped never to open. Inside was a uniform she hadn't worn in 30 years and identification cards that listed her true qualifications. Mary Chun, former colonel, Human Defense Force, specialist in rapid deployment operations. Within 6 hours, the pastoral beauty of New Eden was transformed. Farms that had grown food for 3 centuries began retooling their equipment. Mary's neighbor, a gentleman who wrote poetry about butterflies, supervised the conversion of crop dusting aircraft into something that could carry far more dangerous cargo than pesticide. The children on New Eden played in the fields as they always had, unaware that their parents were calmly preparing for war on Zephyrian homeworld. Admiral Kethfer reviewed intelligence reports with growing satisfaction. Human ship movements appeared random and non-threatening. Some vessels had changed course, but this was normal when political tensions arose. The humans were probably repositioning to avoid Zephyrian patrols, showing appropriate caution. His intelligence officer, a competent young female named Sithara, seemed less confident. Sir, the movement patterns are unusual. Ships are converging on specific coordinates, but we can't determine any strategic value to these positions. Kethfer dismissed her concerns with a wave of his clawed hand. Humans are emotional creatures, Sithara. They're probably holding memorial services or organizing protests. Let them waste fuel on meaningless gestures. What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that humans had spent 3,000 years preparing for this day. Not specifically for war with the Zephyrians, but for any situation that might threaten human children. Every human ship, no matter how innocent its purpose, had been designed with hidden capabilities. Every human world, no matter how peaceful, contained manufacturing infrastructure that could be rapidly converted. Every human adult had received training that they hoped never to use. The galaxy had enjoyed 15,000 years of peace because humans had made it their job to ensure that peace continued. But they had never forgotten that peace was fragile, and that sometimes it could only be preserved through the credible threat of overwhelming force. Dr. James Wright sat in his Zephyrian prison cell, staring at the walls and thinking about his daughter Emily. She was 13 years old, brilliant and curious, with her mother's smile and her father's stubborn streak. She was somewhere on this world, probably scared and confused, wondering why her father didn't come to rescue her. The Zephyrians had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that because humans were peaceful, they were weak. They had mistaken humanity's choice not to use violence for an inability to use violence. In the corridors of the prison, Wright could hear Zephyrian guards discussing the situation with casual confidence. They spoke of human protests, diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions. They expected the usual tools of civilized negotiation. What they would get instead was something the galaxy hadn't seen in 15 millennia. Humans who had decided that talk was over. The first official message arrived 36 hours after the children were taken. It was broadcast simultaneously to every Zephyrian communication station, every news network, every diplomatic channel. The voice was calm, professional, and absolutely certain. This is Ambassador David Kim, speaking for the human species. We demand the immediate return of our children, unharmed and without condition. You have 30 standard days to comply. This is our first and only request. We will not negotiate. We will not compromise. Return our children, or we will come for them. Kethfer laughed when he heard it. 30 days? Empty threats? The humans didn't even have a military fleet capable of challenging Zephyrian space defenses. He was about to learn how wrong he was. 3 weeks into the crisis, the galaxy began to notice that something was very wrong. It started with small observations. Trade ships that had carried human goods for centuries suddenly changed their cargo manifests. Industrial stations that had produced art, medicine, and luxury items for millennia began manufacturing materials that had no obvious civilian use. The quiet background hum of human civilization had shifted to a different frequency, and those who knew how to listen were becoming deeply troubled. Dr. Killian Vross, the Confederation's leading expert on human behavior, stood before the Emergency Intelligence Committee with data that made no sense according to everything they thought they knew about humanity. The pattern is consistent across all human space, she reported, her forearms gesturing at the holographic displays surrounding the committee members. Manufacturing capacity has increased by 400%. Resource extraction has tripled. Most disturbing of all, every human civilian transport has been modified within the past 2 weeks. General Vexmore of the Altarian Defense Force leaned forward in his crystalline chair. Modified how? Enhanced engines, reinforced hulls, and... Dr. Vross paused, checking her data again. Weapon mounts. Every single one of them now has weapon mounts. The silence in the chamber was deafening. For 3,000 years, human ships had been known for their peaceful designs. They carried art, food, medicine, and knowledge to every corner of the galaxy. The idea that they could be weapons platforms had never seriously occurred to anyone. That's impossible, declared Administrator Youth of the Cetacean Collective. The Harmony Accords specifically prohibit military modifications to civilian vessels. The humans drafted most of those regulations themselves. Dr. Vross activated another display. I had the same thought. So I reviewed the original treaty documents. The humans were very careful with their language. The accords prohibit the mounting of weapons on civilian ships during peacetime. They say nothing about the capability to mount weapons when needed. The implications hit the committee like a physical blow. Every human ship they had ever seen, every peaceful trader and explorer and colony vessel, had been designed from the beginning with hidden military potential on New Geneva Station. Administrator Pelix watched with growing alarm as human vessels arrived by the dozen. He had called the Human Liaison Office for an explanation and been told simply that the ships were repositioning for efficiency. But Pelix had been managing space traffic for 60 years, and he knew military staging when he saw it. The humans weren't being secretive about their activities. They filed proper flight plans, followed all traffic control protocols, and paid their docking fees on time. But within hours of arrival, each ship underwent rapid modifications that transformed it from a civilian vessel into something else entirely. Pelix watched through his office window as a human art transport called Serenity's Dream had its cargo bay converted into what looked suspiciously like a fighter launch bay. The work was done by the ship's own crew, using equipment that they had apparently been carrying all along. "Computer," Pelix said aloud, "show me the registration data for the vessel Serenity's Dream." Serenity's Dream, registered human vessel, has been transporting artistic works and cultural artifacts for 147 years. No violations on record. Current crew of 32, all certified in error. Data file corrupted. Pelix felt a chill run through his six-chambered heart. He pulled up the records for the other human ships at his station. Every single crew file showed the same thing. After listing civilian occupations like artist, teacher, or merchant, the data became corrupted exactly where military qualifications would be listed. It wasn't corruption. It was classification. And the classification protocols were now being lifted. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of what had once been the cargo freighter. Peaceful sunrise. The ship looked almost the same from the outside, but everything else had changed. Hidden panels had opened to reveal weapon systems that had been built into the hull from the moment it left the shipyard. Cargo bays had been reconfigured into barracks for the 200 soldiers who had come aboard at the last staging point. But the most dramatic change was in the crew themselves. Maria still looked like a civilian cargo hauler, but the illusion was wearing thin. Her uniform now bore rank insignia that marked her as a colonel in the Human Defense Force. Her crew moved with military precision, their friendly civilian demeanor replaced by the focused efficiency of professional soldiers. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving tactical updates from Fleet Command. The Zephyrians have positioned their border patrols to intercept individual ships, but they're not expecting coordinated fleet actions." Maria nodded. Of course they weren't. For 3,000 years, humans had maintained the illusion that they were a peaceful species that happened to have some defensive capabilities. The reality was far more complex and far more terrifying. Humanity didn't have a military. Humanity was the military. Every human adult had received combat training as part of their basic education. Every human ship had been designed with military potential. Every human world had manufacturing capability that could be rapidly converted to wartime production. The peaceful civilization that the galaxy had known for millennia was actually the largest, most sophisticated military force in galactic history, disguised as farmers and artists and teachers. On Earth, the human homeworld. Prime Minister Sarah Jackson addressed the Global Assembly for the first time since the crisis began. Her words were broadcast across human space and intercepted by intelligence services throughout the galaxy. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of hidden purpose. "For 3 millennia, we have kept the peace. We have chosen diplomacy over force, cooperation over conquest, building over breaking. We have done this because we remember what war costs. And we have sworn that our children would grow up in a galaxy free from the horror we once knew. She paused, and her next words would be recorded by historians as the moment when the galaxy learned the truth about humanity. But some mistakes cannot be forgiven. Some lines cannot be crossed. Some crimes demand justice that diplomacy cannot provide. Our children have been taken from us. The galaxy that we have spent 3,000 years protecting has failed to protect what we value most. On Zephyrian homeworld, Admiral Kethver watched the broadcast with growing unease. The human prime minister's words were not those of a peaceful species seeking negotiation. They were the words of a military commander preparing for war. The 30-day deadline stands, Jackson continued. Return our children or face the consequences. To our friends in the galaxy, we say this: we do not want war. We have never wanted war, but we have always been ready for it. Stand aside and let us retrieve what belongs to us. To the Zephyrian Empire, we say this: you have seen our merchant ships and called us weak. You have seen our artists and called us soft. You have seen our teachers and called us naive. The camera moved closer, and Jackson's eyes held the cold certainty of absolute purpose. You are about to see our soldiers. Across the galaxy, species that had known humans for thousands of years suddenly realized that they had never truly known them at all. The peaceful neighbors, the helpful mediators, the gentle teachers of children had always been something else entirely. A military force of unimaginable size and capability, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the day when their greatest treasure would be threatened. That day had come. Intelligence. Reports flooded into Confederation Central from every corner of human space. Peaceful colony worlds were transforming into fortress planets. Art galleries were becoming weapons factories. University campuses were becoming military training grounds. And everywhere. The same pattern. The transformation was too fast, too smooth, too coordinated to be improvised. This had all been planned, prepared, and practiced for centuries. The humans had spent 3,000 years earning the galaxy's trust while never forgetting that trust. Once broken, might need to be replaced by fear. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in her office, staring at intelligence reports that painted a picture of humanity unlike anything in the official histories. Her own species, she realized, had been living next door to the most powerful military force in the galaxy, without ever suspecting it. The worst part was that the humans had never lied about it. They had simply never found it necessary to tell the whole truth. 27 days remained on the human ultimatum. 27 days for the Zephyrians to return the children and avoid learning exactly what humans were capable of. When diplomacy failed, 20-7 days for the galaxy to decide whether it wanted to watch from the sidelines or risk standing between humanity and its young. On the 30th day, Admiral Kethver stood on his flagship and made the decision that would define his species' future. The human ultimatum expires in 6 hours, his aide reported. High Command requests your final response. Kethver looked at the tactical display showing his fleet positions. 200 Zephyrian warships, the pride of an empire that had ruled space for 10,000 years. Orbital defense platforms that had never been breached. Ground-based shield generators that could withstand planetary bombardment. Send this message to the humans, he said. The Zephyrian Empire does not negotiate with terrorists. The children are under our protection and will remain so until this matter is resolved through proper legal channels. Any hostile action will be met with overwhelming force. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations to come. The humans didn't respond with threats or demands. They simply began to move. Commander Sarah Kim, formerly a schoolteacher on New Eden, now found herself standing on the bridge of the battleship Patient Teacher. The name wasn't ironic. It had been chosen deliberately. For 30 days, humanity had been teaching the galaxy a lesson. Today, the final exam would begin. All stations report ready, her tactical officer announced. Lieutenant Collins had been a street musician just a month ago. Now he coordinated the movements of 300 ships with the precision of a master conductor. Signal all units, Sarah commanded. Operation Homecoming is now active. Remember, our mission is not conquest. Our mission is not revenge. Our mission is to bring our children home. The first phase of the human assault wasn't what anyone expected. They didn't attack the Zephyrian fleet. They didn't target military installations. They didn't even attempt to break through the orbital defenses around Zephyrian homeworld. Instead, they simply turned off the lights. Across Zephyrian space, communication relays went silent. Not destroyed, captured. Shipping lanes that had carried the lifeblood of empire for centuries found themselves occupied by human vessels that appeared from nowhere. Trade stations that had operated for millennia suddenly discovered that their traffic control systems were no longer under their control. The humans had spent 30 days positioning forces throughout Zephyrian territory, disguised as the random movements of panicked civilians. Now, those forces revealed their true purpose. Sir, Cythera burst into Kethver's command center. We're receiving reports from all our outer colonies. Human forces have taken control of orbital infrastructure across 17 systems. Kethver stared at his aide in disbelief. That's impossible. We have defensive fleets positioned at every major installation. They're not engaging our fleets, sir. They're bypassing them entirely. Human ships are appearing inside our defensive perimeters, using some kind of stealth technology we've never encountered. They're not destroying anything. They're just taking control of essential systems. The reports kept coming. Power stations captured intact. Communication hubs seized without a shot fired. Cargo vessels boarded and searched. Their crews treated politely but firmly, while human marines verified that no human prisoners were aboard. Admiral Vasquez, watching from Confederation Central, began to understand the true horror of what she was witnessing. This wasn't warfare as the galaxy understood it. This was something far more sophisticated and far more terrifying. The systematic dismantling of a civilization's ability to function. They're not trying to destroy the Zephyrian Empire, she whispered to her aide. They're performing surgery on it. General Thekra of the Zephyrian Third Fleet found himself in command of 200 ships that had suddenly become irrelevant. His forces were positioned to defend against a direct assault on the homeworld, but the humans weren't coming directly. They were everywhere and nowhere, striking at targets that seemed random but were revealing themselves to be precisely chosen. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're losing contact with fleet supply bases. The humans have taken control of fuel depot stations in 6 different systems. Thekra felt the tactical situation slipping away from him like sand through his claws. How many human ships are we facing? Unknown, sir. Our sensors can only track the ones they're allowing us to see. Intelligence estimates suggest thousands of vessels, but many appeared to be civilian conversions. That was the most disturbing part. The humans weren't using purpose-built warships for much of their assault. Art transports had become troop carriers. Agricultural vessels had become supply ships. Even passenger liners had been converted into mobile command centers. The galaxy was witnessing the transformation of an entire civilization from peace to war in less than 30 days. On New Geneva Station, Administrator Pelix watched in fascination as human ships moved through his space with perfect coordination. They weren't threatening him or his station, but their very presence changed everything. Zephyrian vessels that had used his station as a hub for decades suddenly found themselves unable to dock, not because the humans prevented it, but because their own command structure had lost the ability to give coherent orders. How are they doing this? He wondered aloud. His chief engineer, a practical being with 4 eyes and 6 arms, provided the answer. They're not conquering territory, Administrator. They're conquering information. Every communication relay, every traffic control system, every supply coordination center. They're taking control of the nervous system of Zephyrian civilization. The humans had learned something important in their 3,000 years of keeping the peace. Modern civilizations were incredibly complex and incredibly fragile. Take away their ability to communicate and coordinate, and even the mightiest empire would collapse under its own weight. Dr. Killian Vross, still trying to analyze human capabilities for the Confederation Council, made a discovery that chilled her to her very core. She had been studying the logistics of the human operation, trying to understand how they had managed to position so many forces so quickly. The answer was simple and terrifying. They hadn't positioned forces quickly. They had been positioning forces slowly. For 3,000 years, every human trade route, established over the centuries, had been chosen with military logistics in mind. Every diplomatic agreement had included provisions for emergency access to strategic locations. Every cultural exchange program had placed human personnel in positions where they could gather intelligence about potential enemy capabilities. The humans had been preparing for this war since the day they joined the Confederation, not because they wanted war, but because they understood that peace could only be maintained by those prepared for its failure. They've been planning this for 3 millennia, she reported to the emergency session. Every aspect of human civilization has been designed to support this capability. They're not just a species with a military. They're a military that happens to have a civilian population. On Zephyrian homeworld, 73 human children sat in their detention facility and watched the stars through reinforced windows. They didn't understand the politics or the strategies, but they could feel something changing. The Zephyrian guards were nervous now, jumping at shadows and speaking in worried whispers. 13-year-old Emily Wright had been watching the patterns. She was her father's daughter, curious and analytical, and she had noticed things that the adults might have missed. The orbital traffic had changed over the past few days. Ships were arriving, but they weren't Zephyrian vessels. Something's happening, she whispered to Tommy Martinez, who had become her closest friend during their captivity. Tommy nodded. He was only 8, but he was brave and smart. My mom always said that if anything bad happened, Dad would come for us. All the human dads would come. Emily looked back at the stars, where new lights were moving in patterns she didn't recognize. I think they're already here. Admiral Kethver stood in his command center, surrounded by reports of systems failing across his empire, and finally began to understand the magnitude of his error. He had kidnapped the children of a species that had spent 3,000 years secretly becoming the most powerful military force in galactic history, and they were coming to get them back. Sir, Sithara reported, her voice barely under control. Long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet formations converging on our position. Estimated time of arrival, 18 hours. Kefir looked at the tactical display and saw his empire's doom approaching. Not conquest, not occupation, not the traditional changing of one flag for another. Something far more personal and far more final. The arrival of parents who had come to collect their children. The storm was about to break, and the Zephyrian Empire stood directly in its path. The siege of Zephyrian homeworld lasted exactly 18 hours. Admiral Kethver watched from his flagship as the human fleet materialized around his planet like a closing fist. They didn't arrive with the chaos of an invasion force or the ceremony of a conquering army. They simply appeared, hundreds upon hundreds of ships moving with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Sir, his aide whispered, they're everywhere. It was true. Human vessels surrounded the planet in perfect spherical formation, their positions calculated to provide overlapping fields of fire that would eliminate any possibility of escape. But more disturbing than their numbers was their behavior. They weren't launching attacks or issuing demands. They were just waiting. The silence stretched for 6 hours before the communication finally came. Zephyr in command. This is Admiral Chun of the Human Liberation Fleet. The voice was calm, professional, and absolutely certain. We are here for our children. You have 1 hour to release them unharmed to the landing platform we will designate. Any attempt to use them as hostages will result in immediate action. Kethfer looked around his command center at the faces of his officers. They had spent their entire careers preparing for warfare as their ancestors understood it. Fleets meeting fleets in open space, orbital bombardments, planetary assaults that lasted months or years. This was something else entirely. What are our options? He asked his tactical officer, General Vorthak, a veteran of the last Zephyrian War 3 centuries ago, studied his displays with growing despair. Sir, they have complete tactical superiority. Our orbital defense platforms are surrounded and targeted. Our fleet is boxed in with no room to maneuver. They could destroy everything we have in minutes. Then why haven't they? Kethfer asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Sithara, his intelligence officer, had been monitoring human communications. Sir, I've been listening to their internal channels. They're not here to conquer us. They don't want our territory or our resources or our surrender. They just want their children back. On the surface of the planet, in the facility where 73 human children had been held for 31 days, the guards were in a state of near panic. Reports filtered down from orbit of human forces that had appeared as if from nothing. Of a siege that could end their civilization in hours. Emily Wright stood at the window, watching strange lights move across the sky. She had been tracking the patterns for days now, and she understood what she was seeing. They came for us, she said to the other children. Just like my dad said they would. Tommy Martinez, who had been the youngest when they were taken but had grown older in ways no 8-year-old should have to, pressed close to the window. How many of them are there? All of them, Emily replied with quiet certainty. All of them came for us. She was more right than she knew. The human fleet surrounding Zephyrian homeworld represented the largest military mobilization in galactic history. Not because they had intended to build such a force, but because when human children were threatened, every human became a soldier. Teachers had put down their books and picked up weapons. Artists had left their studios to pilot warships. Farmers had abandoned their fields to serve as Marines. An entire civilization had transformed itself because 73 children needed to come home. The hour passed without response from Zephyrian command. What happened next became known as the 18-hour war, though historians would argue that it wasn't really a war at all. Wars implied 2 sides fighting each other. This was more like a surgical procedure performed by experts who wanted to cause as little damage as possible while achieving their objective. Human forces didn't bombard the planet. They didn't engage the Zephyrian fleet. Instead, they simply took control. Orbital defense platforms found their targeting systems no longer responded to their commands. Zephyrian warships discovered that their navigation computers had been compromised, leaving them effectively helpless. Ground-based communication centers reported that their equipment was functioning perfectly, but somehow only transmitting what the humans wanted them to transmit. It was a level of technological superiority that the galaxy had never imagined possible. How? Admiral Kethfer asked aloud as he watched his command authority dissolve around him. How are they doing this? The answer came from Dr. Keelian Vross, broadcasting from Confederation Central. She had spent the past month studying human capabilities and had finally understood the truth. They've been inside your systems for 3,000 years, she announced to the emergency council session. Every piece of technology you've bought from human traders, every software update you've accepted from human programmers, every communications protocol you've agreed to in diplomatic negotiations. They've been preparing for this moment since the day they joined the Confederation. The humans had never intended to conquer the galaxy, but they had ensured that if anyone ever threatened what they valued most, they would have the capability to respond with overwhelming force. On the planet's surface, human landing craft began to descend. Not invasion craft, but simple transports designed for one purpose: to bring children home. The Zephyrian guards at the detention facility faced a choice. They could resist and face the consequences, or they could stand aside and let the humans take what they had come for. Looking at the tactical displays showing the complete collapse of their defensive capabilities, the choice was obvious. Emily Wright was the first to see her father. Dr. James Wright walked through the facility doors, still wearing his scientist's clothes, but now carrying the equipment and bearing the expression of a man who had traveled across the galaxy to retrieve his daughter. Behind him came a team of human soldiers who moved through the building with the precision of people who had studied its layout for weeks. "Daddy!" Emily ran to him, and for a moment the larger war, the politics, the technology, the vast fleets in orbit all disappeared. There was just a father holding his daughter who had been taken from him. "Are you okay?" he whispered into her hair. "Did they hurt you?" "We're okay, Daddy. We knew you'd come for us." We all knew. Behind them, 72 other reunions were taking place as human parents found their children and human soldiers secured the facility. No shots were fired. No violence was necessary. The Zephyrians offered no resistance to the recovery of children they should never have taken in the first place. Within 6 hours, every human child was safely aboard human ships. Within 12 hours, the human fleet began to withdraw. The speed of the withdrawal was almost as shocking as the speed of the assault. Ships that had appeared with devastating precision disappeared just as quickly, melting away into space as if they had never existed. Within 18 hours of the operation's beginning, Zephyrian homeworld was free of human forces. But everything had changed. Admiral Kethver stood in his command center, technically still in control of his fleet, but knowing that this control existed only because the humans allowed it. They could return at any time, take control of any system, neutralize any threat. And everyone in the galaxy now knew it. "Sir," Sithar reported, "we're receiving a communication from Human Command." The message was brief and devastating in its simplicity. "Our children are safely recovered. This matter is closed. We recommend that all parties reflect carefully on the events of the past month and govern themselves accordingly." The Zephyrian Empire faced a choice. They could continue to resist, continue to claim that their actions had been justified, and face the complete dismantlement of their civilization by forces that had proven they could accomplish it whenever they chose. Or they could accept responsibility and hope that human mercy was as real as human power. 3 days later, Admiral Kethver stood before the Galactic Council and formally surrendered himself for trial on charges of kidnapping and unlawful detention. The Zephyrian government agreed to pay reparations to the families affected and submitted to a human-supervised rehabilitation program designed to prevent similar incidents. But the real change wasn't in Zephyrian space. It was throughout the galaxy. Ambassador Elena Vasquez found herself in a strange position. For 30 years, she had served as a diplomatic liaison to humanity, believing she understood their nature and capabilities. Now she realized she had been working alongside the most powerful military force in galactic history without ever suspecting it. "The question," she said to the emergency council session, "is what we do with this knowledge." The debate lasted for weeks. Some species called for restrictions on human capabilities, arguing that no single species should possess such overwhelming power. Others pointed out that humanity had possessed these capabilities for 3 millennia and have used them only to maintain peace, until their children were threatened. The answer came from an unexpected source: the children themselves. Emily Wright, speaking to the council as a representative of those who had been rescued, offered the perspective that would shape galactic policy for generations to come. "My people didn't want to show you how strong they are," she said, her 13-year-old voice carrying wisdom beyond her years. "They just wanted to keep everyone safe. They only showed you their strength when someone took us away from them. If you don't want to see human soldiers again, don't take human children."